Hello again, it's your old Uncle Jeff on March 4th, 2022, the day after the anniversary of Martha's birthday. Coming to you with another vlog, this time a more controversial subject, and that would be the first of 3 or 4 vlogs on all of my psychic experiences I've had over my life. 35 years ago when I started studying this, it was fairly controversial, and people would just say, well, you're crazy if you believe that there's anything outside this physical world. However, in the last 10, 15, 20 years, it's become much more mainstream. The government has admitted that yes, there are UFOs and we don't know where they're from. And there are many, many people that are real psychics, not carnival fakers, and channelers. And I've had the good fortune to be associated with 3 of them. So to start out with, yes, I do believe in reincarnation. I have evidence of that is true, that satisfies me. I also believe there are many other places in the universe where people live, millions of galaxies, solar systems, planets where they are located at the proper distance from their star sun so that sentient beings with a soul, can live there. They may have different looking bodies than we do. And I also believe all humans have psychic powers. It's just that in this dense Earth planet, we forget all of that because it's much easier to live our life experiencing the pairs of opposites, good, bad, my way, your way, Republican, Democrat, and all the things that give us experience here. Some people, however, are born with their psychic experience still with them from their previous life, and as children, will say things that their parents will say, oh, just shush, 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 don't say that, and shut them up, and then they eventually learn it. Like a 5-year-old girl once told her mother, Grandma's going to die, and she said, now don't talk like that, and then Grandma died about a week later, and of course then they never spoke about it again. So, that's been the way it's done in the past. Hopefully, for the young people looking at this in the future, these types of things will be much more accepted by them. So I've had experience with mediums and channelers, people who actually let the voice come through their body, and I will outline these over probably at least 2 more vlogs. I realized once I outlined it that I had so many experiences, there's no way I could fit it in even to 1. So I'll start out between age 2 and 5. I had my first experience. I had a starlight in the opposite upper corner of my bedroom when I was in my crib, and it would accompany me at night, and it felt good, and I just thought it was sort of my friend, and that was during the time that Lloyd was my father, and it continued through the year that he was gone, I believe, and then once Peter became my father, it disappeared. So I think it was there to protect me during that difficult time. At age 6 in 1955, of course, I've already told how I predicted Uncle Peter would become my father. And they all kind of chuckled at, well, how does a kid know that? But, I already knew what the plan was, and so I just expressed it. I had a reading in San Diego by one of my psychics, June Sieber, way back in the early 90s. And in the middle of the reading, she just said, you've had an interesting life. You had a first father who wasn't really your father, but then when the real one walked up, you knew who he was. That first one was just a placeholder, and that's the way she described Lloyd. And of course, all of that is exactly what happened. By age 9 in 1958, Mom had started me in stamp collecting. Dr. Jordahl gave me a box of all his old National Geographic maps so I could learn about the countries. And I was fascinated by this map of the Caribbean that showed us an inset of Saba with the funny town names, Hell's Gate and the Bottom, both things that kids would go tee-hee about because you could only say hell in church when you recited the Nicene Creed, and of course your bottom was your backside. But I just knew I had to go there someday, and yes, I came here in 1983, and it felt like home, and now I live here. At age 10 in 1959, we now were in the first full summer of our new lake cottage, and in June frequently the weather was cold and rainy. You couldn't go outside and go swimming, so I just was inspired by this project that I had to draw a map, and I don't know where it came from. It was in my head. So Dad brought me a piece of school tag board, 3 foot by 3 foot, and I laid it out on the living room table, and I started drawing this map of the country called Makmondu, Maqmondu. It was shaped like a piece of the southeastern United States. If you took Tennessee, North and South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, and Florida, and just carved them out, so kind of a square with a panhandle hanging off, that was Makmondu. And I made very detailed drawings of all the towns and railroads and rivers and lakes, and in the north there were a lot of mountains with fjords like in Norway, and in the center were plains like in Minnesota and the Dakotas, and along the edges were beaches like California, Texas, and Florida. And I took pieces of paper and wrote out, all typed out actually, all the names of the towns and what their population was, and this was all quite well organized. And then I rolled it up and put a string around it and put it in the attic closet. And then the next summer, when we came back and it was bad weather, I pulled it out and I continued making more details on it. I named towns like, I took the name Fargo and I changed it to Nearcombe, and I took the town Oslo and changed it to Knee-High, and the capital was Silo because it looked like San Francisco, and you could see down to this beautiful semicircular harbor, so from above you could see low. And I had a lake like Green Lake. I called it Greenleaf Lake, and the town was Greenleaf, and that's where I lived on this map. So a lot of fantasy in that. And then I put it back in the closet at the end of the summer. Well, the next summer, I got my dog Kipper, and so I was a little more distracted with that. But when it was a rainy day once, I thought, oh, I'm going to get my map of Makmondu back out. I went in the closet, and it was nowhere to be found. And I thought, huh. And I asked my parents, did you throw away my map? And they said, oh, no, we'd never do anything like that. We know how much work you put into that. And I looked and looked and looked, and it just disappeared into thin air along with the descriptive pages. So it was gone. About 2 weeks ago, I was watching a video about Plato's description of the lost continent of Atlantis, which was in the Atlantic Ocean. And even though this had occurred even thousands of years before Plato lived, back then people had psychic visions of what it looked like. And he had drawn a map of Atlantis, either that he channeled or someone else had channeled. And I looked at it, and it was kind of a rectangular thing like this, and it had a little appendage in the upper left. And I looked at it and I thought, oh, that sort of looks like an upside down Makmondu that's sort of squished. And then I read further, and it said in the old days they frequently put south at the top of the map. So when I took it and turned it around, it was exactly Makmondu, only instead of being square, it was more like this with the Florida part down here. So that was sort of a recent discovery. Now I move on to age 12, 13. I'm in 7th grade, and at night I used to read my social studies book in this comfy old easy chair that I had in my room that sank way down in. The heat was on in the winter, and I had a pole lamp with, I think, 100-watt light bulbs in it, so it was rather warm there, and I could move my eyes across the lines, and I would put myself into a trance holding the book. And then all of a sudden I realized that I didn't hear, see, smell, taste, or touch anything in my physical room. It was like I was in this dark void, and there were like little sparkly lights around in the dark void, but I was aware of myself being there, and that the world didn't exist where I was, that because I closed my eyes and didn't interact with my physical senses, that the physical world just disappeared like my map of Makmondu. And I'd be in there probably for 10 or 15 seconds, and then I'd open my eyes up and be suddenly back in my chair, and I could do that at will. And to me it was like time and space stopped. It was like the seconds ticking on the clock, and I was stuck in between two of the seconds, and the space was just gone. So I had an inkling as to the time-space continuum, and that there is no time and space in the astral world or in heaven on the other side. The next unusual experience, which has more to do with a past life, was at age 14. I was in 9th grade. I started German, and I immediately liked German, and I just thought it was so fascinating, and the complicated grammar, and I couldn't wait to learn more. And so I'd come home and chatter on about it at the dining room table. And of course, B was very indulgent, because I would talk to her about it after school. And, oh, that's interesting. And my parents were totally disinterested in it. I suppose some of it being that my father had been through 2 world wars with the Germans, and my mother won. And then my mother also did not do well in foreign languages and got a D in French. And so they would say, okay, let's talk about something else. But 9th grade was the time when you chose your vocational project to do for social studies. And Mom said, well, you're smart. You should do yours on being a doctor. And maybe I had suggested I might want to do something with German, and she said, "Oh, you wouldn't be happy with that income. You're more used to what a doctor makes." So I did my vocational unit on being a doctor, but I continued on, chattering on about German as much as I could get by with. I could see it bored them to tears. After 3 or 4 months, I could look ahead in the book and look at the new text that didn't have the translation. It was just the straight German, and I could read it and understand almost all of it. I would understand the new vocabulary without looking the words up. And I thought, oh, this is fun, it's just easy language because I can just kind of guess at it. Years later, my good psychic friend in Phoenix, Kay Randall May, was giving me a reading once, and she said, this past life popped up, and she said, you had a past life as the second child in a European business family. You were the daughter, and then the oldest sibling was a son, and he, of course, was going to take over this business, shipping or something. She didn't know exactly what it was. And he had to learn foreign languages, but he was no good at it. And you were interested, but because you were a girl, you were not allowed to have an education back in those days, probably 1500s, 1600s. So when he would struggle studying the languages, you would tutor him and surreptitiously learn the language along with him. And then there was karma that you'd gotten in that life that in this life you've been able to cash in, because now you've had the opportunity to learn languages. And I told her, I said, I've taken 5 languages. And I often wonder if that brother in that life wasn't my mother in the present life, because they had dislike of foreign languages in common. Then we jumped to age 21, that's 1970, when I worked in the Catholic Mental Hospital in Germany. And I had a pen pal down in Lindau, which is on the Bodensee or Lake Constance at the southern foot of Germany. And I was going to go on a weekend down there to visit him from Rottweil, where I was working. It's required a change of trains halfway in a town called Radolfzell. And I had about 1 hour and 20 minutes, so I got off the train, put my bag in a locker, and walked out the front of the train station and down the street that went straight into town. And I passed the first street, and while I'm walking in the second block, all of a sudden I get this vision that around the corner is a bakery, a bookstore, and an apothecary, which is German for a pharmacy. And I thought, why would they think that? I've never been here before. And so I go around the corner, and indeed, there was a bakery, a bookstore, and an apothecary in that order. Not all right next door to each other, maybe with a few shops in between, but they had these old-fashioned filigreed iron German signs hanging out with the names. And I looked and I said, wasn't that fun? I predicted that. Wow. And I didn't think anything more of it. And then later on, I found out what a déjà vu experience was, which is when a current timeline crosses a previous timeline, and there's a short connection, and your memory that's in the part of the brain that you don't normally use then puts the two together. So I guess maybe I lived a life in Radolfzell. Maybe that's why I like German. When I came back to my senior year at the University of Minnesota, I was still taking French, and that's where I met my friend Jim Cohen, who became my roommate, described in previous videos for a short time. And we had to do exposés, which was a report where you stand up and read it to the class in French. And Jim did his on the French singer Edith Piaf. I'd never heard of her, but it was fascinating, and I'm listening to him, and he's playing snippets of music of hers, and I'm just so taken by the voice and the emotion in her songs. And then he had given us the text of the songs to follow along. Oh, after class I said, "Where did you get that music?" And he said, "Oh, just go to Tower Records in Dinkytown, which is next to the university, and they have a lot of foreign music there." And I got my record album there. So right after class I went right up there, and they had about 5 Piaf albums, and I bought the one that had all the text written on pages in the center of the album with translation into English. And I took it home, played it on my roommate's record player, and just was so taken by this and emotionally involved in it. Some of the songs brought me to tears, and over the next couple of weeks I went back and bought the other 4 albums, and then throughout my life I ended up buying at least 20 of her CDs, and I think I had at one time a collection of every song she ever recorded. Also 2 or 3 books about her, 2 movies, anything about Piaf I've either read or watched. And on another reading once, I don't remember if this was June or Kay Heatherly or Kay Randall May, it was one of the 3, brought up once, "You have a connection to a French woman." And I said, and I'm thinking, well, I guess it's got to be Piaf because I don't know any other French women. And I said, "Yeah." And they go on and they say, and this was a rather prominent person, like they were in like an actor or a performer, and Piaf did actually do acting and did stage performances besides just doing her songs and singing. And I said, I never said the name, I just said, "Yes, I did." And she said, "And this woman had lots of lovers," which is true. And she said, "You were one of them in a former life. It was sort of a short life because, Piaf had lived in the first 13 years of my life. She died in 63. So, I guess I'll find out someday when I cross over what our connection was. The next experience was my senior year. I was 22 in 1971, and it was a winter afternoon in my dorm room. I was in Pioneer Hall at the University of Minnesota. We had these nice double rooms where you had your own bedroom and then a central little living room. So I was just taking a nap before it was time to go down to the cafeteria for supper. And I'm lying on the top of my bed, and the next thing I know, what I think I'm having is a dream, although it would be considered a lucid dream because I remember every detail of it. I was up on the ceiling, and I'm thinking, well, I'm on the ceiling, but I'm looking down at what's that on the bed, and then I realized it was me, my body, asleep, but I didn't really associate much with it. I knew that I was up there on the ceiling. So I thought, this is funny. I'm floating around on the ceiling. I'm looking at, my physical body down there on the bed taking a nap. And then as soon as I connected that way, I was down on the floor at the foot of the bed trying to get back into my body, and I'm going up and in and out. And it reminded me of a garage door where the opener was stuck and it was going up and down and up and down and up and down. And then finally I ended up back in my body, and I woke up, except I couldn't open my eyes up. So I'm lying there thinking, okay, have I had a stroke? And I found out later it's called sleep paralysis, when you have an out-of-body experience, which is what this was, I found years later. Sometimes you don't line up all the meridians and the chakras and everything right away. Your soul is a little bit off kilter, where the expression came, I was beside myself with anxiety. You're literally beside yourself. You're here and the body is here. And so I slowly started concentrating on just moving my index finger a little bit, and then 2 fingers, and over, I suppose, about 30 to 45 seconds, I slowly got myself lined up, and I could move, and I could open my eyes up, and I'd broken out in a sweat, and I got up, I walked out into the living room where Scott, my roommate, was studying, and I'm kind of walking springy. I feel like my body is real light. I told him what had happened, and he said, "Oh, that's weird," and so brushed it off, and that was the end of that. But years later, I found out what an out-of-body experience was. And the last incident for this vlog will be my father's death, November 8th, 1977. I was 28 years old, doing my family practice residency in St. Mary's Hospital. I previously mentioned Mom was sleeping in a sleeping room on the station. I was sleeping in a recliner chair right next to Dad's bed while he was starting to do what's called Shane Stokes respirations, where they take a breath and then the period between breaths goes from 5 to 10 to 15 seconds, and he was kind of doing that. And I was asleep, but not in a real deep sleep. And then all of a sudden, a hand hit my shoulder and went like that and startled me awake. And I looked around, I thought the nurse was there, Mom was there, and there was nobody in the room. The room was dimly lit by the little night lights that were in the floor that came out of a little vent window. So I could see everything in the room. I could see my dad lying there, and I heard a breath, and then so I'm kind of gathering my thoughts and everything, and then I'm noticing, well, there's no more breathing, and I'm looking at him, and I'm thinking, is he gone? And all of a sudden, one big, kind of a big sigh, and I thought, ooh, that must be it. And I waited and waited, and no more breathing. And then I had a very interesting experience. Above his body, an amorphous sort of shape kind of then turned into something that looked like a big loaf of bread. And it was sort of like a mist, but it had its own light. And I'm looking around thinking, did the nurse walk in with a flashlight? Is she doing that? And no. This thing had lights. And when I looked at it, I could see there were lights sparkling like this, little tiny points of lights just sparkling, and it's just hovering there over his body. And I'm looking and looking, and it's becoming clearer to me. And then all of a sudden, and it was probably no more than 5 to 10 seconds at the most, it started compressing, and it turned into kind of like a gumdrop. And then it went like that, and it went up through the ceiling. And that was his soul leaving his body. A few weeks later, in my residency, I was in a code blue, and the man didn't make it. And as soon as they call the code, everybody just leaves the room because they don't want to be around a dead person that they didn't save. But one of the head nurses, I think, was across from me, and I was there, and we both sort of stayed with the person in sort of a reverent attitude. And they had already turned the lights back down. This was about 3 in the morning, I remember. So the bright lights were on during the code, and then they turned them down. But we could still see everything. And I'm just sort of standing there, and she is too. And then all of a sudden, this round ball appears between us. And it's the same thing, only a different shape. And it's going like this, little bitty lights twinkling. And I'm thinking, okay, I've seen this before. And I looked through it at her, and she's looking at it and not surprised. And then that ball kind of turned into a cigar and went up through the ceiling. And I looked at her, and our eyes met, and I said, "Did you see that?" And she said, "Yeah." She said, "That was his soul leaving his body." She said, "I've seen that a few times over the years, And I said, "No, and I saw it once with my father." So that was my confirmation. Part 2 will be next with more interesting stuff.